Chapter 25. I have anticipated the course of events in order not to interrupt the narrative of the affairs of Egypt. I now return to what was taking place in France whilst the fate of this colony was being decided at the point of the sword. The whole attention of the first consul was devoted to the indispensable duty of repairing the evils occasioned by civil discord and revolutionary anarchy. He instituted commissions, caused a revision of the accounts of all persons who had had any dealings with the different branches of the administration, and the public treasury had now, for the first time, counterclaims to set up, instead of being, as heretofore, declared indebted for incomplete or imaginary supplies alleged to have been furnished. This exercise of severity had an influence upon the national credit. The Council of State reckoned at this period a great number of men of talent and of untainted patriotism. The greater part were competent to undertake the management of the principal branches of the administration and to give them a proper direction. Never had the machinery of any government yielded more readily to the impulse given to it. It appeared as if everyone had measured the depth of the precipice into which the state was well nigh plunged by the blunders of the late government, and was on his guard against a return of them. Regularity had taken the place of disorder. The system of public accounts was clear, the administration prompt in all its acts. Nothing was suffered to fall into arrears. Our present condition was a promising augury of the future. The state of the public mind at that time will be better appreciated by the following document. Army of the Grisons, French Republic, Liberty, Equality, headquarters at Trent, the 3rd Pluviose, year 9 of the Republic. MacDonald, General-Chief of the Army of the Grisons, to General Renier. As I was crossing the snow-capped and icy mountains of the highest Alps, I received with inexpressible delight, my dear Renier, the letter you had the kindness to write me under the date of 12th Brumaire. I have never failed inquiring after you whenever a vessel arrived from Egypt, but I experience a much livelier pleasure in hearing from you direct. You are now, then, become a living mummy, separated from your family and friends. It must be a source of consolation to them and to yourself to reflect upon the courage and the grandeur of the French name which you have carried to those barbarous people, and caused to be respected by them. Accordingly, the national rewards that await you have been anticipated by the admiration of the world. Soon after your embarkation, war was again kindled, and we have marched to Naples and driven an imbecile and weak monarch from a throne which he had not dared to resume, any more than to return to his capital, in spite of the opportunities afforded him by the inconstancy of fortune. We have since had to bewail the capriciousness of this dame, and have been defeated everywhere owing to the pusillanimity of the old tyrannical and too arrogant Directory. Bonaparte at last made his appearance, upset that presumptuous government, seized the reins, and now directs with a steady hand the car of the revolution to that goal which all honest men were desirous of reaching. This extraordinary man is not alarmed at the pressure of the burden. He reforms the armies, calls back the proscribed citizens, throws open the prisons in which innocence was left to groan, abolishes the revolutionary laws, restores public confidence, extends his production to industry, gives life to commerce, and the Republic, triumphant by his arms, dreaded by her enemies, and respected by Europe, assumes at the present day the first rank in the scale which Providence has eternally assigned to her. I am, my dear Renier, as great a stranger to adulation as to flattery. Such is my austerity of principles that I blame and condemn what is wrong with no less candor than I praise what is right. I am not the trumpeter of Bonaparte, but merely pay homage to truth. Our military and warlike affairs are as prosperous as we could wish, and it is to be hoped at last that the Emperor, better enlightened upon his real interests, will shake off the odious influence of the freebooters of England and conclude a peace no less durable than wished for. Whilst we are invading the hereditary states, Monsieur de Cobencel is proceeding slowly with the Treaty of Luneville and giving the formal assurance of an early peace. May this event come to pass, my dear Renier, and restore to you your family. Your friends long for your return, and I request you to consider me in the foremost ranks of them. Your general-in-chief has been confirmed in his appointment. If we are to judge of men by their outward acts, General Minot's nomination will be universally approved of. Those who, like you, are upon the spot can better appreciate his real worth. Lacroix and Blanc are still with me. The former intends writing direct and give you a detailed account of events. I have but few people in your acquaintance about me. Farewell, my dear Regnier. I have deeply regretted the loss of our poor Kleber. He was, like yourself, a great enthusiast for your expedition. It is affirmed that 12 or 15,000 English are gone to pay you a visit. You will probably give them such a reception as they met with from us in 1794. I embrace you and relate cordially. Signed, MacDonald. The preliminaries of peace having been ratified at Paris, the first consul dispatched one of his aides-de-camp, General Lauriston, as the bearer of them to London, where they were duly exchanged. That event was soon announced by the firing of guns from the Invalids. The intoxication of joy exceeded all bounds. The contracting powers, France, Spain, and Holland, on the one part, and England on the other, had pledged themselves to send plenipotentiaries to MES. We were on the eve of a general peace. The proceedings of France in her foreign relations were earnestly directed to that object. Chapter 26. Mr. de Talleyrand had accelerated the execution of the clause of the Treaty of Luneville, which were to determine the indemnities to be allowed to the princes of the empire who had suffered losses owing to the concessions made to France, as well as to the new arrangements that had taken place in Germany. He had hastened as much as possible the proceedings of that Congress in order to verify the new order of things. It appeared to him that no time was to be lost in doing away with difficulties which were only calculated to keep up a spirit of acrimony and to prevent France from giving stability to her new condition. Those negotiations had lasted a 12-month without reconciling the various pretensions and intrigues that had been set up. France and Russia interposed to bring them to a termination. The first consul gave a proof of his satisfaction to M. de la Forêt by naming him his minister plenipotentiary at Ratisbonne, where he appeared as the equal of M. de Buller, thither sent by Russia for the same object and in the same character. These two ministers succeeded in bringing the labors of the Congress of Ratisbonne to a close, which, in consequence of the many new territorial arrangements placed under the protection of France, afforded to the first consul a powerful influence in Germany. Reports began to circulate at this period of extortions levied upon those princes who had claimed to bring forward many worthy interests crushed on this occasion. Some would not submit to any loss, others strove to obtain everything. The general discontent shortly vented itself in open language. The first had only failed because they would not submit to the tribute. The others found that part of their claims were admitted, but denied the right of anyone to impose such high terms as were demanded of them. Such is the world, neither rank nor distinctions will alter its nature. The language of complaint was so often repeated that at last it reached the ears of the first consul, who afterwards loudly complained in my hearing on the subject. It is even affirmed that in 1810 and 1811 he received proofs of those extortions together with a list of the sums illegally levied on the occasion. Be this as it may, the negotiation of Ratisbonne was managed with very great dexterity, and affairs had taken a favorable turn. The English had long hesitated to evacuate Egypt. They had even openly supported the insurrection of the Mamelukes, but they had yielded at last to the just representations of the Sultan and set sail for Europe. A great number of officers had passed through France on their way home. They had met in Paris with the most marked attention. Some of them had even been admitted into the company of the first consul. All had had an opportunity of satisfying themselves of the baseness of the stories by means of which public opinion in their country was misled with respect to the state of France and its government. The curiosity to visit the banks of the Seine was not confined to military men. The same desire was felt by a great number of persons no less distinguished by the rank which they held in their native country than by their personal character and talents. The notions imbibed by men of such high repute and expressed by them on their return to London proved useful auxiliaries to the first consul's policy. For an apprehension was beginning to be felt that the English, who had exhausted every diplomatic subtlety in order to evade the restoration of Malta, would no longer agree to a peace. The plenipotentiaries entrusted with the mission of concluding it were to assemble at Amiens, but the British minister was slow in making his appearance. Some uneasiness was felt for the motives of such an unexpected delay. The First Consul kept urging Lord Hawkesbury and signified to him his anxiety to convert the preliminaries of peace into a definitive treaty, which was alone calculated to consolidate the repose of the world. His importunities, and no doubt also the language held by the English who had visited France, succeeded in overcoming the repugnance of the British cabinet. Lord Cornwallis at last arrived in Paris. He was presented to the First Consul, who received him with marked distinction, and on the occasion of the preliminaries, complimented him by the grandest fete that had yet been given to any public character. We had inherited this custom from the Directory, who gave orders for fetes on the most trifling occasions and laid out in concerts and illuminations that money which was drawn from an already exhausted treasury. The conferences, however, kept pace with the fetes. The negotiation was opened at first under an unfavorable aspect. Lord Cornwallis, in a conference which he held with Joseph Bonaparte, who had the charge of negotiating on the part of France, gave some insight into the difficulties which would spring out of the possession of Malta. Nevertheless, as the preliminaries had decided the question, and nothing remained but to name the power to whom the charge should be assigned of guaranteeing the independence of the island, very little distrust was occasioned by the transfer of the negotiation to Amiens. The parties, however, had scarcely met in that town when the British minister raised the most unexpected pretensions. He demanded that since there was a French language at Malta, there should also be there of his own nation. The difficulty was met at once by an effort to stipulate that both powers should renounce such a claim. He next expressed some anxiety as to the eventual fate of that island. He demanded that not only some guarantee on this subject should be pointed out, but that its protection should be expressly stipulated for her by the establishment of a foreign garrison in Malta. A simple course was proposed to him as calculated to obviate every inconvenience. This was to restore the order to its primitive institution and render it a mere order for exercising hospitality as in its early days, instead of an order of nobility into which it had grown in the course of time. To raise the fortifications that covered the whole island and convert it into an extensive lazaretto open alike to all nations frequenting the Mediterranean. This course did not meet the views of his government, and he rejected it. Joseph Bonaparte, whose natural bias as well as his instructions led him to soften down every difficulty, presented a new project in which he offered to place the island under the protection of the great powers of Europe. This proposal did not meet with a better reception than the preceding ones. England demanded that Malta should be confided to the custody of the King of Naples. The plenipotentiary replied by claiming the literal execution of the plenary articles. Those stipulations, he added, are become a primitive law which none of the contracting powers can retract. A refusal to carry them into effect is tantamount to a refusal of peace. To the strict observance of this principle, I have sacrificed many articles which prejudiced in no way the interest of Great Britain. I have felt myself bound to relinquish them so soon as it was proved to me that they were not strictly comprised in the preliminaries. How can an article be now set up which is in all respects opposed to them? What do the preliminaries say? That Malta shall be restored to the order of St. John of Jerusalem? Is the order of St. John of Jerusalem centered in the King of Naples? It is pretended that the order is too weak in itself. The project secures it the guarantees and protection of the principal powers of Europe. The preliminaries only mention one power. It has occurred to the French government that the object of the preliminaries would be more effectually accomplished by the simultaneous guarantee of the great powers as being a more imposing and a more suitable one. Nevertheless, as he claims above all the absolute, and even if that should be insisted upon, the literal execution of the preliminaries, it is ready to sacrifice them, this article, which a kind of political decorum had suggested to it. Lord Cornwallis replied by a counter note wherein taking advantage of the word protection, which was expressed in the preliminaries, and of the hatred of the natives for the Knights of St. John, he insisted upon the necessity as well as propriety of delivering Malta to the custody of Ferdinand IV. The distress strait of the order, which was unable to pay the troops required for the defense of the forts, and certain words that had escaped the French plenipotentiary in the previous conferences they had held together in Paris, appeared to him to be sufficient grounds for persisting in this demand. Joseph Bonaparte thought otherwise. He commented in warm terms upon the pretensions of the English ministry and required the insertion in the protocol of the following note. The undersigned has read with the greatest care every document connected with the negotiation without discovering any trace of the proposal alleged to have been made by France for the delivering up of Malta to His Sicilian Majesty's troops. The fourth article of the preliminaries cannot bear that interpretation. When the undersigned had the honor of meeting Lord Cornwallis for the first time at Paris on the 24th Brumaire, he was far from supposing that their mutual congratulations on the facility of terminating the mission confided to him could be considered in the light of proposals or of groundworks for treaties. He had not then received his powers, which were not delivered to him until the 30th Brumaire, and were communicated to the British minister on the 14th Brumaire only. The case was otherwise with the latter, who came to Paris ready, provided with instructions from his government on his very first visit. He spoke of Malta as a perplexing article, although it was agreed that the garrison of that island should consist of troops belonging to a third power, until the order should be able to organize its means of defense. Lord Cornwallis considered Spain to be wholly inadmissible as a guaranteeing power, owing to its alliance with France. Russia appeared too far removed and Naples too weak. The British government, always advertising to a guarantee to be furnished by the guaranteeing power as being a basis agreed upon, observed that Naples was inadequate to the expense. The other side may possibly have added that two such powers as France and England should not be arrested by a consideration of that nature. The actual discussion of all these matters was, however, adjourned to the period of the opening of the negotiation. In the conferences that have taken place at Amiens, in the protocols, in the plan of a treaty of 14th Nivose, 4th January, the undersigned has never uttered a single expression which could convey the idea that his government would consent to the island of Malta being delivered over to the protection of the Neapolitan troops for a period of 3 years. He proposed, on the contrary, in the protocol of the 23rd Nivose, 13th of January, that Malta should be placed under the protection and guarantee of the principal powers of Europe, each of which was to have furnished 200 men for its garrison. That island would thus have been guarded by 1,200 experienced soldiers to be paid by the order, Lord Cornwallis having himself made the observation that the revenues of the vacant commandantships would afford them sufficient means of so doing. The anonymous writing, which has been handed to the undersigned by desire of Lord Cornwallis, bears no authentic character. It appears to have been drawn up by discontented people. It does not speak the language of the inhabitants of Malta, an island possessed of no importance except through the order. When they shall be made acquainted with the articles of the treaty that concern them, they will be delighted at the reestablishment in Malta of an order of which it will become an integral part, admitting that circumstances might require a temporary and intermediate garrison to occupy Malta from the moment of its evacuation by the British forces until the moment when the order shall have formed a corps composed of Maltese and foreigners. It is still demonstratively proved that there should be as little departure as possible from the fourth article, the preliminaries, which stipulate that the island should be restored to the order. That article anticipates the necessity of guaranteeing and protecting power. The means of carrying it into effect are left to the wisdom and good faith of both governments. All their endeavors must aim at this sole object, that Malta should belong to the order. They must avoid anything that might fetter its prerogative, or that, instead of affording a protector to the knights, would have the semblance of giving them a master or diminish the influence they should exclusively exercise over Malta. The French government proposes by its project England, Austria, Spain, Prussia, and Russia as protectors of the order. It would be difficult to attach greater splendor to it or to afford it a more effectual protection. Why retain a Neapolitan garrison during a period of 3 years? Can it be from apprehension of foreign enemies? The above 6 named powers would no doubt be sufficient protection to the island. Is it fear from the Maltese themselves? The order will secure to itself the affections of the people if the stipulations are faithfully observed. These will be their best internal defense. Admitting, however, the necessity of a garrison, were it only for the purpose of security and internal police, does it require 3 years to form a corps of 1,000 men who, with the addition of 400 knights and 600 Maltese, would be more than sufficient to meet every exigency? Since the plan of delegating the protection and guarantees of the order to the great powers is now agreed upon, would it be either necessary or proper that the King of Naples should hold a garrison in Malta for the space of 3 years? Will the protectors be protected? The Grand Master, in short, to whatever country he may belong, view with any feeling of satisfaction the order placed under the guardianship of the troops of the only prince who has any pretensions to set up to Malta? Would it not be more becoming and more in accordance with the preliminaries if there be an admitted necessary for a foreign force at Malta, that a body of 1,000 Swiss should be raised? Those officers should be named by the existing landmen and selected amongst those who had not borne arms in the present war. They would in the end settle at Malta, at a distance from all foreign influence, being dependent on the Grand Master only. They would in reality be the soldiers of the order, and Malta would become their adopted country. The order, therefore, would have everything to gain on the score of consideration and independence, with a garrison composed of knights, of Maltese, and of a corps of Swiss soldiers, such as other powers keep in their pay. The result of the foregoing observations is that France has never consented to the introduction of Neapolitan troops into Malta, and still less that the island should be given up to His Sicilian Majesty, who would furnish in conjunction with the Maltese forces the troops requisite for garrisoning the principal forts during the space of 3 years. This proposal proceeded from the Lord Cornwallis in the conference of the 23rd Nivosa, 13th January, from the perseverance of the British government in insisting upon prolonging for 3 years the stay of a foreign garrison in Malta, and upon delivering up to that island in the most formal manner, not to the order itself, but to His Sicilian Majesty, the French government was led to think, and was justified in asserting, that a departure was made from the preliminaries laid down, which preliminaries, it is well known, are the basis of a peace. If that language was not thought of as so conciliatory a nature as heretofore, the cause is not to be ascribed to any change in the sentiments of France. But when, in a discussion, all arguments have been exhausted and have failed to carry conviction, the natural inference to be drawn by one of the parties is that the other rejects every kind of arrangement. If it be the intention of the British government to maintain the order of St. John and the island of Malta in a state of perfect independence, a hope in which the undersigned wishes to indulge, he trusts that the foregoing project, drawn up with the object of removing all foreign influence, will meet with the approbation of Lord Cornwallis. This project is unquestionably preferable in all respects to every other hitherto presented. The undersigned cannot find words too strong to urge its adoption. Should, however, the British government have irrevocably adopted the plan of establishing a Neapolitan garrison in Malta, the undersigned, with the view of hastening the moment of peace, would consent to admit it in the manner in which it is drawn up in the sequel of this note. Lord Cornwallis will discern in the two versions of the plan relating to Malta the application of the principle just developed by the undersigned. He is further directed to insist upon the insertion into the treaty of the article concerning the Barbary States such as it is drawn up in his project, and upon the concurrence of the contracting powers to put an end to the hostilities carried on by those states in the Mediterranean, to the utter disgrace of Europe and of modern times. The mere notification that would be made to the Barbary States of the determination of the contracting powers on that subject would restore security to the commerce of the United States, of Portugal, of the King of Naples, and of all the other states of Italy. And if the competition in the Mediterranean trade, which such a measure would considerably augment, could be a ground of apprehension to any nation, it would unquestionably be so to France and Spain, which, from their natural position and their separate intercourse with the Barbary States, carry on that trade at all times with greater security and advantages than other powers. To them, therefore, the sacrifices would be the greatest. But in a question which involves the political morality as well as the dignity of European nations, motives of mere personal interest should be discarded. Strength is given to political bodies as it is to individuals for the protection of the weak. How glorious and consoling would be the reflection that a war productive of such great calamities had terminated at least by an act indicative of the deep interest taking in the prosperity of all commercial nations. This question, besides, is bound up with that of Malta, from which it cannot be separated. For if the contracting parties do not take upon themselves to put an end to the hostilities carried on by the Barbary States, it may be said with great truth that the Order of St. John cannot cease to wage personal war against those states without failing in their primitive engagement and incurring the loss of all their property. The generous founders of the commanderships had no other object in view than to afford protection to Christians against the piracies of the Barbary States, and every civilian in Europe would agree in opinion that the Order of Malta, if they renounced the fulfillment of that duty, thus overlooked the object of their primitive foundation, would lose their title to possession of the property conceded to them for that specific purpose. A new occurrence started up to render the negotiation more complicated and brought on a declaration of which England should have taken advantage. The question of the new states formed in Italy had been agitated. The British ministry had replied by the formal declaration that they could not, amongst others, acknowledge the King of Etruria. The first consul endeavored to make them understand the imprudence of such a resolution and addressed to them the following observation through the channel of his accredited minister. In reply to the declaration of the British minister respecting the King of Etruria, which is contained in the same protocol, and to his preceding verbal declarations considering the Italian republics, Citizen Joseph Bonaparte has intimated that he would make known to his government the repugnance felt by His Britannic Majesty to recognize the King of Etruria, the Italian Republic, and the Republic of Genoa. As the recognition of those states by His Britannic Majesty can be of no advantage to the French Republic, the French plenipotentiary would no longer insist upon it. He is desirous, however, that the observations he is about to offer may be taken by the British cabinet into its serious consideration. The political system of Europe is founded upon the existence and recognition of all powers that divide its immense and beautiful territories between them. If His Britannic Majesty refuses to recognize three powers standing in so distinguished a rank, it necessarily renounces taking any interest in the people composing those three states. Can it be possible to admit the hypothesis that British commerce is indifferent to the trade of Genoa, Leghorn, the mouths of the Po, and the Italian Republic? And if her commerce should suffer from any shackles imposed by those three states, to whom could His Britannic Majesty apply for redress? As he cannot hold out any reciprocity, since the states of Genoa, Tuscany, and of the Italian Republic carry on no sort of trade with England, though they are found to be useful and even necessary channels for British commerce. And if these three powers, offended at not finding themselves acknowledged by the great powers should introduce any change in their internal organization and seek protection by incorporating themselves with a great continental power, His Britannic Majesty likewise shuts himself out from any right of appeal. Though he could not be indifferent to those changes, complaints are sometimes raised against the continental extension of the French Republic, but is not that a necessary consequence of the small Italian states being driven by the greater powers to the necessity of looking for refuge and protection to France alone? The Cisalpine Republic, though acknowledged by the emperor in the Treaty of Campo Formio, could never obtain the admission of her minister at the court of Vienna. That republic was still considered by the emperor as if the Treaty of Campo Formio had never had an existence. As the general peace was not then concluded, the court of Vienna, no doubt, viewed its treaty in the light of a truce. Now, however, that there exists a general peace if those states are still kept in uncertainty as to the recognition of their independence. They will become apprehensive of a renewal of the sites which they had already experienced and feel the necessity of drawing closer the ties that unite them to the French nation. The same principle that induced France to relinquish 3/4 of its conquest has dictated to the First Consul the course of not interfering in the affairs of those small states any farther than was deemed indispensable towards restoring order and establishing in them a firm organization. Frankness will naturally suggest the question whether his moderation is destined to contend against any false and ill judgment measures of other powers, or whether the peace is considered in no other light than a truce. This would be a prospect equally painful and discouraging to a man of upright principles, and would infallibly be attended with results which no human foresight can calculate. Chapter 27. Whilst the only remaining unconcluded peace engaged the attention of government, the English of note continued to flock to Paris. One of the most eager to visit us was the celebrated Fox, an opposition member of the British government. The curiosity to see General Bonaparte had induced him to anticipate the period of peace. The First Consul was not behindhand in his desire to hold a colloquial intercourse with him. He was much pleased with his society, and I have often seen them pass long nights in close conversation together. Mr. Fox appeared to have formed a correct notion of the First Consul's character, and to have felt an affection for him. Having, on his return to England, heard of a conspiracy against his life, he communicated the information to him, which afterwards proved of service. The First Consul's attention was turned towards Italy. That country was still in the same state in which the Battle of Marigo had replaced it. It had an executive directory, councils, and, as necessary consequence, renewed elections which opened a field for intrigues and consequently for disorders. A national vote had just decided in France that the dignity of First Consul should be held for life. All admitted the necessity of such a measure to prevent the discords that might be occasioned by rival ambitions, of which some glimmerings were already breaking out. The First Consul sought to place Italy in harmony with France and caused it to be suggested to the former country that it should adopt the modifications adopted by the latter. In other words, that it should substitute a president, a senate, and a legislative body for its then existing form of government. He was desirous that this change should be insensibly effected, and he would readily have gone in person to bring it about. But his presence in France could not be dispensed with, and he could not cross the mountains, and he was unwilling to delegate the task to other hands. He adopted a middle course, convoked at Lyon the deputies of the departments and cities of Italy who were to give utterance to the wishes of their country. All hastened to the appointed place with a zeal against which the rigor of the season and the snows that almost blocked up the roads on the mountains proved inefficient barriers. The First Consul, on his part, was not long in making his appearance. The welfare of the Italians was the object of his journey. His attention was exclusively engaged with their affairs. The remains of the army of Egypt, which he had brought together at Lyon, where he was desirous of meeting them, afforded him but a momentary diversion from this task. He received the whole Italian deputation, in a solemn audience, but only by sections of 40 deputies each at a time, because he felt desirous of impressing them all with the sincerity of his interest, which their country had excited in his breast. He addressed to each section a long speech on the dangers resulting from revolutions. He depictured the fatal consequences ever attending political agitation, civil war, proscriptions, and all the evils incident to them. He dwelt upon the necessity of forgetting animosities and injuries, of assuming an attitude which would be in harmony with neighboring nations in order to inspire them with confidence. This was not assuredly the language of a ferocious conqueror. It would have done honor to the greatest philosophers in antiquity, and was hailed with general approbation. The Italians had sent to Lyon the most distinguished characters amongst the clergy, nobility, and gentry of their country. They seemed to have placed a sort of national pride in the choice of their deputies. They were vain of display to the view of the second city of France, the treasures of their civilization. The first consul was much pleased with this assembly, whose principles and composition were in accordance with his wishes. He has often dwelt at a later period upon the proper sentiments which animated them. The Italians, on the other hand, were no less pleased at the speech he addressed to them. They were more particularly grateful for his forbidding the French to interfere in their discussions. They opened their sittings after several deliberations in which many of the members displayed considerable talents. They accepted the mode of government proposed to them, that is to say, a president, a senate, a legislative body, and a council of state. The first consul was appointed to the presidency, which at first he neither accepted nor refused. When all proceedings had been gone through and the modifications adopted, nothing remained but to dissolve the assembly. He decided upon closing the session in person, repaired to the hall of deliberations, and said to them in Italian that he should always feel an interest in the prosperity and welfare of the people they represented, but that being unable to devote to Italy, their native country, all that attention which she had a right to claim from him, he was under the necessity of naming a substitute who should reside on the spot, and that he therefore appointed Monsieur de Melzi as their vice president. In the selection, he had been guided by the desire of proving his solicitude for the Cisalpine Republic, where he knew that Monsieur de Melzi, upon whom he set a great value, was held in the highest esteem. This appointment was hailed with the loudest acclamations. The assembly broke up, the deputies retired to their homes, and their first consul returned to Paris. A few days before his journey to Lyon, he had united his brother Louis to Mademoiselle Hortense Bornay, and shown on that occasion a fresh proof of the austerity of his religious principles. He had himself been married during the Reign of Terror. His sister Caroline had been united to General Murat in the interval between the 18th Brumaire and the Battle of Marengo. The exercise of religion was forbidden at both periods, nor was it yet tolerated at the moment of which I am speaking. The church is still exhibiting the same state of profanation as before. Accordingly, the marriage of Louis was celebrated in conformity with the custom at this time at the private residence of the first consul in the Rue de la Victoire at the Chaussée d'Antin. A priest came to give the nuptial blessing to the youthful couple. The first consul availed himself of the opportunity to have a like blessing bestowed on the union of his sister Caroline, who had not been married in the church, conceiving no doubt that this important act of our life should be sanctioned by religion after having been sanctioned by the presence of civil authority. In his own case, however, he dispensed with the religious ceremony, a circumstance which gave rise to some conjectures amongst us. He was therefore only bound to Josephine by the civil act, a bond susceptible to being broken asunder agreeably to the legal clauses concerning marriage. The ecclesiastical discipline had therefore nothing to do with his divorce, whatever may have been his pretensions in the year 1810. Winter was drawing to a close. The plenipotentiaries had at last overcome the feelings of repugnance manifested by the British ministry. They had closed their discussions and repaired to Paris. The peace with Russia and the Porte, respectively, the preliminaries of London, and the peace of Badajoz with Portugal were published in Paris between the 11th and 19th Vendemiaire. On the 18th Brumaire, following general peace was restored and celebrated with great splendor. Of all the works of the first consul, none afforded such uniform satisfaction or gave rise to such flattering hopes. The public rejoicings attested the delight felt everywhere at the event.